You've done this 100 times: renovate a kitchen, plan a wedding, promise a project by Friday. And nearly every time, it takes longer than you thought. Not occasionally, almost always. In 1979, two psychologists gave this a name, and what they found explained something that quietly cost the software industry billions of dollars a year. Every single sprint, every single deadline, without fail. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky called it the planning fallacy, and the original study wasn't even about code. It was students estimating how long their thesis projects would take. Best case, most likely case, worst case. On average, the actual time it took was closer to their worst case estimate than their most likely one. And here's the detail that should sound familiar to anyone who's ever written a sprint estimate. These students weren't first-timers guessing blind. Many had written a thesis before. Experience barely moved the number. The mechanism isn't what most people assume. The obvious explanation is optimism. People just want to believe things will go smoothly. But Kahneman and Tversky found something more specific and more mechanical than simple optimism. When you estimate how long a task will take, your brain defaults to something called the inside view. You picture the task itself, the steps involved, and you build a mental simulation. Write the function, test it, ship it. That simulation runs smoothly because your brain is simulating the plan, not the history of every other plan that didn't survive contact with the reality. The alternative is called the outside view, and it works completely differently. Instead of simulating this specific task, you ask a different question entirely. How long have similar tasks actually taken in the past? Across many instances, regardless of how confident I felt going in, Kahneman's research found that outside view estimates are dramatically more accurate than inside view estimates, even when the person using the inside view has more detailed, specific knowledge of the task itself. Detail doesn't fix this. More information about the plan just makes the simulation feel more convincing, not more accurate. This is where it gets specifically brutal for programming. Most professions that plan projects, construction, filmmaking, event planning, have accumulated decades of institutional outside view data. A contractor roughly knows from thousands of prior renovations that a kitchen remodel takes 12 to 16 weeks regardless of what any individual homeowner's plan looks like on paper. Software doesn't have that same stable base rate because every project is claimed to be sufficiently unique that past data doesn't quite apply, which pushes developers again and again back toward the inside view, the one Kahneman's research says is reliably the worst predictor, precisely because it feels more rigorous. There's a second layer researchers have found specific to technical estimation, and it explains why the planning fallacy hits harder here than in most fields. It's called the unpacking effect. The more you break a task down into detailed substeps, the longer your total estimate becomes, and it becomes more accurate, not less, when you do this correctly. But here's the trap. Programmers are very good at unpacking the parts of a task they can already picture. Write the function, write the test, deploy it. They are much worse at unpacking the parts they can't yet picture, because those parts, by definition, haven't happened yet. The debugging session nobody saw coming. The dependency that breaks in a way nobody anticipated. The unpacking effect only helps you when you're unpacking the whole task, including the unknown unknowns, and those are exactly the parts your brain has no simulation for, so they simply get left out of the estimate entirely. The obvious fix seems like it should be simple. Just add a buffer, pad every estimate by 50%, done. Research on this specific fix has found it doesn't reliably work, and the reason is uncomfortable. When developers are told to add a buffer, many unconsciously shrink their initial estimate first, so the padded number lands right back where their gut instinct originally was. The bias doesn't get corrected. It gets laundered through an extra step that feels like correction, without actually being one. What research has found to genuinely work is closer to forcing an outside view question into the room, explicitly, before anyone commits to a number. Not, how long will this specific task take, but how long have tasks that felt this similar actually taken before, on this team, historically? That single reframing in studies on this exact bias across multiple industries has produced measurably better estimates than any amount of internal padding or optimism correction. It works because it stops your brain from simulating the plan and forces it to consult the record instead. Programmers aren't bad at estimating because they're bad at their jobs, or because software is uniquely chaotic, or because deadlines are set by people who don't understand engineering. The planning fallacy is not a skill gap. It's a structural feature of how the human brain generates predictions, running the exact same way in a fifth grader's thesis estimate and a senior engineer's sprint planning, 45 years apart, in a study that had nothing to do with code at all. The fix was never estimating harder. It's asking a different question before committing to a number, one that looks backward at what actually happened before instead of forward into a simulation that only ever shows you the version where nothing goes wrong. What's the most wildly wrong estimate you've ever given? And do you remember what actually went sideways? Tell me in the comments.